Welcome to Artificiality from Helen and Dave Edwards. Artificiality is dedicated to understanding the emerging collective experiences we humans are having with AI and our fellow humans. Our work is grounded in the sciences of artificial intelligence, collective intelligence, complexity, neuroscience, and psychology, and framed through the lens of design, philosophy, and systems thinking. We're on this learning journey too, so we strive to find the frontiers, to ask the best questions, and to stay curious. We hope to open minds and empower people to experience our complex age in new, creative ways. To gain the full Artificiality experience, please subscribe at artificiality.substack.com to receive our full publication of audio, video, and written content. Please check out our work as Sonder Studio at getsonder.com and reach out with any comments or questions via email at hello@getsonder.com. Michael Bungay Stanier has an extraordinary talent for distilling the complexity of human relationships into easy-to-remember and follow frameworks, doing so with just the right amount of Australian humor and plenty of vulnerability. Despite his remarkable success with books like The Coaching Habit, The Advice Trap, and How to Begin, Michael never comes across as one of those gurus who think they have all the answers. That mindset comes through perfectly in the title of his newest book, How to Work with Almost Anyone. Not absolutely anyone, almost anyone. The book is built around 5 questions for building the best possible relationships, which we have found to be very helpful in our working relationship. We have grown to be friends with Michael through our repeated gatherings at the House of Beautiful Business. I know all 3 of us would encourage all of our listeners and readers to join us at the next house as well. In this interview, we talk about Michael's new book, how to use a keystone conversation to build the best possible relationship, and we even consider how to apply Michael's frameworks to working with generative AI. Michael, thank you very much for joining us again. We're very excited to have you here.
Yeah, it's a welcome back moment.
It's a welcome back.
Thank you. Which one of us do you think is the slow learner here? Is it me or is it you?
I think we might have a race for that, the slow race.
Well, I'm happy to be back. We hung out together in Sintra in Portugal not that long ago, and it was outstanding. So yes. This is fun.
Let's do that again, like next week, maybe?
Okay, sure. No problem.
Yeah, if you get the house, we'll join you, like the actual building again.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Well, thanks for joining us again. So you have a new book out.
I do.
And I'll start with our sort of standard question. What inspired you to write this new book?
Well, there's 17 different answers to that, so I'll pick a few of them. At a deep level, one of my goals is to try and become a writer, which always confuses people because I've written 8 or 9 books that have been published. So they're like, I think you've already done that, Michael. Come on, man, catch up. And I'm like, no, I'm an author for sure because I've got books out there in the world. But a writer is somebody who orients a life around that act of creating. So they read more, they write regularly. There's a constant there's a centering of that practice in the work that they do. And so one of the motivators is this is a trailing indicator of me being a writer and just going, that's one of the things I do, and it's the central thing that I do. The second reason is it's part of the way I make a living is actually writing books and selling books. And I've got the good luck to have this one book called The Coaching Habit, which is somehow still bestseller and selling a bunch, and actually it literally generates enough money for me to live off, which is very, 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 very rare as an author, as you know, because you've written books, and as every other author listening knows, which is it's almost impossible. But somehow I had, magic unicorn fairy dust sprinkle on this book, and it's taken off. So one of the things that is clear on a business level is I'm like, okay, so I want to write a constellation of books because success breeds success. And if people buy The Coaching Habit, maybe they'll find other books of mine to buy as well. And then on the kind of the most tactical and immediate level, I've got a bunch of ideas. I've got a little folder right over there, which is called Book Ideas. And it's full of ideas. Although actually what it is it's full of about 3 ideas that I keep having and writing down and forgetting so that when I open it up, it's the same damn idea I've written down 93 times. And so I thought I knew, so I came to a moment where I'm like, okay, so it's time for the next book. One of my jobs is when I finish one book is to start writing the next book. And I was like, okay, so I've got a really good idea for this book. And I started writing it, and it turned out that it wasn't a good idea at all because I thought I was writing a book about how change happens in organizations. And it turned into this book, which is like how to work with almost anyone. And it just showed up as the book that needed to be written by me at the moment because, our working relationships are such important drivers of our happiness and our success. And, for years I've had a practice around talking about how I want to work with people before we get into the work. And it just felt like this was a useful tool to share in the world. It's going to make more working relationships more successful.
I question about your title. Why? What got you to use the word almost? There has to be a story.
Well, the original title of it was going to be called The Operating Manual, which I thought was okay. But then as I kind of sat with it, thought, the title is everything in a book. It really helps. I mean, one of the reasons that your book is great, Make Better Decisions, is it tells you what's going to happen when you read the book. Like, it's a really strong title. It's really clear about that. And, people spend roughly a nanosecond deciding whether they like or don't like your book based entirely on the title. And when I came close to titles around like How to Work with Almost Anyone, I thought about writing a book called How to Work with Anyone, and then I'm like, I don't know how to work with anyone. I'm like, I am massively overpromising if I'm making that statement, and I don't think anybody would believe it either. And it turns out How to Work with Almost Anyone is a genius title. Because, I mean, it's a fantastic title because everybody laughs and nods and kind of has a kind of wry look in their eyes because they're like, I know who my almost is. It's this person and this person and this person. And I'm like, exactly. And that leaves everybody else who's a key working relationship for you. There's a way that you can build a better, stronger working relationship with them.
I think it's a brilliant title because it's just so honest and sort of vulnerable on your part to say, I'm not writing the book that you would expect to say, which is How to Work with Anyone. I can tell you absolutely anyone, rah. You're like, well, almost anyone, which is, thank you for the reference to our book, but with the reason we use the word better.
Right.
We can't say make great decisions because that's impossible, but just better. That would be... It's a lot more human. It's a lot more human. Yeah. I'm kind of got a bit of an allergy to the kind of the rah-rah gurus who are like, over-promising and kind of blathering on. And I'm like, we're all just trying to do our best. Mm-hmm. And, yours is called Make Better Decisions. The big promise in the book is how to have the best possible relationship. Yeah. So again, I'm not going, every working relationship is going to be amazing. I'm like, your working relationships are on a bell curve, and some are amazing, and some are unamazing. Down the other end of the bell curve are kind of miserable. A chunk of them are in the middle. But what if you could nudge all of them to be 10 or 15 or 20% better? Not just keep the really good ones sparkling, but actually, what if you could make the ones that are hard at the moment and cause you sadness and anger and frustration? What if you could make those more bearable and more workable? Wouldn't that be great? So it's this idea of how do we build the best possible relationship as we interact with reality? Because reality has this way of, mocking people who write books and have ideas and plans and models and stuff. And I'm like, I'm trying to keep it as real as possible and as practical as possible.
I think that was for me personally, a really interesting kind of aha moment. In some level, it's just so obvious. If you work on the bottom 10%, then the rest will sort of take care of itself. But I hadn't really thought about it like that. I'd actually realised as we sat around that gorgeous swimming pool looking out over the hills of Sintra as you ran that workshop, it kind of struck me that what I'd done, and I assume a lot of people do, is take that 10% and just kind of write it off in your mind.
Yeah.
I'm just going to bear that, or I'm going to avoid it, or I'm going to try and like at the next job interview figure out, or the next project interview, figure out how to like what are the questions I can ask to pick up these 10% that I don't want to be with, as opposed to a much more, I guess, it's a bit more equanimity, just sort of rolling into it and saying, I got some responsibility here for just making this just a little bit better, and just a little bit better is good enough.
Well, at least recognize that you have that choice. Because you can look at that bottom 10% and there may be people there where you're like, it's just not worth it. You have a choice to do something or not do. You have two choices, do something or not do something. And both of those choices have risk and reward associated with them, and pros and cons. I think most of us, and I'm certainly guilty of this as well, tend to do what you're just saying, Helen, which is say, there's nothing I can do. My only job here is to suffer, and suffer and endure. And I'm like, sometimes that is true. Sometimes that's the option you have. But what if you could more actively say, look, even if I could make it 3% better, that might be great. And they might be suffering and enduring as well. They might be desperate for this to get better, because it's probably a bit miserable for both of you. So what if you more actively said, what if we could, how could we, Helen, we're going to be working together for the next 6 months. Look, I don't know about you, but I found it, we've had our ups and downs so far. Could we have a conversation about what it would take for us to find the best possible way of working together over the next 6 months, just so that we get to play to our strengths as much as possible and avoid all those areas of conflict that we've already discovered along the way? Would you be up for a conversation around that? Not everybody will be up for that, but some people are like, you know what, that sounds pretty good to me, because I've got a drinking problem now because of you, and it's like, I've got a drinking problem because of you. So maybe we could, at a minimum, go to a bar together.
So, the perfect win-win.
In Sintra, you ran a fantastic workshop. I mean, it was just hands down, everyone was excited and thrilled by it.
Thanks.
And you walked through and explained the keystone conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could share some of that with listeners now, because I think it opens people up to understanding what you're really getting at with this book, right? Like, and why it's such an important book for people to have.
Yeah, sure. So, the title of the book is How to Work with Almost Anyone. The key concept is the best possible relationship, a relationship that is safe and vital and repairable. Those are the three elements. You want psychological safety, that's safe. You want psychological bravery, that's vital. And you want the ability to fix it when things go wrong. So what if you could build the best possible relationship with as many of the key working relationships as possible, the ones that influence happiness and influence success? If you're with me so far, then you're like, great, but how do I do that? And the key tactic in the book is have a conversation about have a conversation about how you work together before you get into the what we're going to be working on. Or have a conversation about how you work together even as you're in the middle of what you're working on. Because we are irresistibly drawn to the work. It's always urgent and important and a crisis and exciting and shiny and demanding and the obvious thing to be doing. And in fact, even with the coaching habit, one of the first questions in that is, what's the real challenge here for you? It's a question about the work that needs to be solved. But this is saying, before you get there, why don't you just take a beat and look that other person in the eye and go, how are we going to do this together? How are we going to be the best versions of ourselves and avoid the worst versions of ourselves? So the keystone conversation is a suggested structure to say, look, most of us are not that familiar and not necessarily that comfortable with a conversation about how we work together. So let me give you 5 good questions that will provide this keystone, this metaphor of an arch coming together, 2 columns arcing over and then becoming solid and stable because of the keystone. That's what this conversation can do. And I've got 5 questions that I suggest that people ask and answer in an exchange of information that gives you the best opportunity to then build a best possible relationship and maintain it and allow you and the work to flourish.
And you walked us through one of those core questions, and it was a great privilege. We you ran this workshop. You had everybody pair up. We did not pair up with talking to each other because that was
because it would have been the end of your working relationship. And we're like,
we never talk about the
insisted
how.
on it. Yeah, I insisted. Like, please don't talk. I don't want you guys to break up in Sintra. It's too beautiful.
But you pair up with other people, and there's always a wonderful moment sometimes when you have workshops. Both of us actually paired up with people. Well, you kind of knew your partner because he'd been at the house before. I didn't. Strangely enough, Mo, the woman who I turned to, lives here in Bend, Oregon.
Oh.
So that was very strange to be in Sintra and be talking to someone across. But we walked through this question about what are you best at?
What's your best? Yeah.
And what's your best, and what are you fulfilled by?
Yeah.
And you had 4 boxes, and there was one of the we've been describing it as box 3, but I'm not sure whether that's the right one. We talk about the box 3, which is what are you best at and most fulfilled by?
Yeah.
And I will say that the effect of that has actually been quite profound for me as we've been thinking about how we're working together.
For both of us, I mean, it's literally become one of those ways that we communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Is that a box 3 moment?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And this is and shout out to the house, because this is the second time this has happened.
I know this is the second time.
Where we're inspired by a book and an author and some ideas that were discussed at the House of Beautiful Business, and then we applied them to our professional and personal life. This one has actually gone better. The last one was a little bit rocky because it was actually, a big challenge. This one's more because it's a different sort of setup.
Yeah.
But now box 3 has become to mean it's almost become code, context-based code, but code for I'd really like you to acknowledge that I'm hating what I'm doing right now. And I'm doing it for you.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, let me teach this to the people listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because I want to make sure we get the right number to the boxes now that we've been using them.
I haven't given the boxes a number, so you can number it any way that works for you. So of the 5 questions, the first one is what's your best? And it's a slightly awkwardly phrased question deliberately, because I didn't actually want to ask, what are you good at? Because that's, as we'll discuss, not actually the best of questions. And I also didn't want to ask, what are your values or what are your strengths? Because that always gets a bit kind of abstract jazz hands for me. I'm like, okay, so fantastic. I'm glad that's one of your strengths. I don't know what to do with that. But what's your best is basically saying, tell me when you shine, tell me when you flow. Tell me when you get into that state where you're lit up, you're in the moment, you're operating at the edge of who you are, but in the best possible way. Tell me that. Because if I know that about you and you know that about me, that's really helpful for us trying to continue to work together and try and have more of those moments. But then the exercise that you can do to kind of develop this and get some more nuance around your answer is, just as you're saying, Dave, this idea of the difference between being good at something and being fulfilled by it. So imagine now a 2x2 box. This is why Dave and Helen are talking about box 3. A 2x2 box, so like a square with a cross in the middle. So you've got a horizontal axis along the bottom and a vertical axis along the side. And the horizontal axis is what are you good at, plus or minus. Plus on the right-hand side, minus on the left-hand side. And then the vertical axis, up and down, is what are you fulfilled by. Now, top right-hand corner is you are fulfilled by it and you are good at it. In other words, this is box 3 in Dave and Helen's life. And hopefully you have a bunch of stuff there. Because it's like, you know what, I can do this work and it lights me up still. This is really helpful. Helpfully in what we might call box 1, this is the box where you are not good at it and you're not fulfilled by it. Hopefully you have nothing there, because this is the worst of all worlds, which is like, I'm useless at it and it sucks my soul and I'm still doing it. It's like, what happened? So you just stop that. You need to stop that. And then you've got the other 2 boxes. I'm not sure how the numbering works. And these are interesting, because on one of the boxes is, I am good at this and I'm not fulfilled by it. And as a listener, that there's a bunch of things that actually, just because of age and competence and you've been around long enough, you got good at a whole bunch of stuff, but it doesn't light you up. It doesn't excite you. It's no longer got any juice for you. But what we always do is we assume that somebody who's good at it is fulfilled by it. We assume that somebody who's good at it should take on that task. So when you're building a working relationship, if you can say to somebody, look, I'm good at this, but I really don't want to do it. So you can use me as a backup or as emergency or as a coach or as a mentor or as a trainer. But can we find some other way of resourcing that particular task because it's not the thing that I want to do? Or if you do give it to me, understand the consequence that you're giving me something that is a bit life-sucking. And then there's the other one, which is you are fulfilled by it, but you're not yet good at it. And that's interesting as well, because what this means is, give me this, because this is my learning edge. This is growth. This is something that I want to grow and develop. But give me a safety net and give me guardrails and give me teaching and training and mentoring, because I'm not yet good enough to actually deliver this at the level it needs to be delivered at, but I'm going to get there. Just give me some time, give me some support around that so that I can step into it. That's where people's learning edge is. That's a super helpful thing to know as well.
Yeah, we found that the boxes to be very helpful. I mean, there's definitely the box, and I think when we were chatting at one point in Century, you talked about the role of being VP of everything else. And that's part of my role in our businesses is all of that. And I realize that those are things that I'm often good at, but not fulfilled by.
Right.
And that's okay. They got to get done. But it's created a new language for us to be able to express that and to be really clear, as you say, of, well, here's the consequences, right? They're going to get it done, but it's not fulfilling. So how do we deal with that? It
opens up all sorts of interesting conversations. So you're like, okay, this needs to get done.
Yeah.
But does it need to be done by me? Does it need to be done in this way? Does it need to be done at this standard? Does it need to be done at this speed and this complexity? Because there's a way that you might go, look, this needs to be done, but I'm going to outsource this. I'm going to get somebody else to do this. Or you're like, I'm not going to outsource it, but I'm going to take an hour a week to do this, not 5 hours a week to do this. So what needs to be true for me to be able to do this in an hour? And you're like, great, we need to stop all this BS and cut this out and just deliver it. So often for those of us who have some success, and I think that's the three of us here, we have a built-in standard of excellence. And that's terrible because there's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't need to be done at an excellent level. It just needs to be done at an adequate level. So a bunch of the stuff that you can be looking at, Dave, if you're VP of everything else, is what's the minimum standard that this needs to be done at? And when you hit that minimum standard, stop. Because you're like, I don't want to do it. But so often we're like, oh, I'll just make this even better, even though nobody cares and I don't even like it.
It's Dave with just a moment of interruption. If you're enjoying our podcast, we'd love for you to give us a positive rating on your favorite podcast platform, share our work with someone you know, and subscribe to all of Artificiality on artificiality.substack.com. We have a lot planned for Artificiality, and we'd love for you to join us. Now, back to the interview.
I find that that way of thinking about it helps me also understand a little bit more about reconceptualizing or just having a different perspective on these productivity debates around what ChatGPT and large language models can do for you as well. Because It's like you can hit that minimum standard so much sooner in a writing task.
That's right.
Some kind of writing task. But then your experience comes into play with checking it and saying, does this actually make sense?
Yeah. You're like, great,
so
this is a good first draft. Now my experience tells me how to re-prompt it to kind of get it to the next level if you want to do that.
Yeah, and that makes it a lot more fulfilling because you're using your experience for 90% of completing the task instead of flipping it around the other way, and experience is the 10%, and you just sort of got this mundane, especially when it because once you get to that point, it feels like busy work.
Right. It does for some of us, because there are some people who love that stuff. Mm-hmm. You're like, great, I need to find that. And I need to find you, and I need to give this to you if the time and the money equation makes sense. I mean, it's one of the miracles of life that some of the stuff that you go, this work sucks. There's some other person going, I love this stuff. Give it to me.
That's how I think about accountants.
Yeah. Is that me too? I'm like...
being very grateful for the fact there are people who actually really like that.
Yeah. Well, and managing the books for our business is one of those, falls into that category. I'm good at it. I spent years doing finance. I'm not fulfilled by it at all. And it was only after we worked through this conversation with you in your workshop that we got to a point where we had a common language to be able to, and it's just recently I turned to going, I think I might want to look at doing this differently. Instead of, being hands-on, there's now services that can do this for us, and let me go look at that. And we're already ready for Helen to support me making that change, as long as the money and the time and works. And I can oversee it because I'm good at it, but I'm not fulfilled enough to put my hands into it anymore. So is it possible to do that? And your workshop teed up that as something that says, oh, now we understand each other. We got the same language here, to figure out how to make those decisions.
And the key thing I want people to be hearing in this conversation is this conversation feels like it's about productivity, but what it is deeply about is the health of Dave and Helen's working relationship. Because, it's hard working with people. It's really hard working with people to whom you're married, because all sorts of weird, complicated power things show up. And I'm assuming this was true for me working with my wife, and I'm assuming it's true for you in some extent as well. And there's a way that what you're doing here is like, sure, working out who does the tasks, but you're actually going, how do we both bloom? How do we both flourish? How do we bring out the best in each other and in the other person, so that we feel joy and happiness and also success in the way we work together?
Yeah, that is definitely the premise.
How do you think about the other boxes? At the start of this conversation, you talked about the difference between being an author and being a writer, and I really do understand that. And aspiring writer. But if you put authorship in that top right-hand box, because you're good at it and it is fulfilling, but writing is you're not as good at it as you aspire to be. How do you think about that relationship?
Well, you can work this at different levels, and I often think that a commitment to finding something that you're good at and fulfilled by doesn't mean that you're going to be good at and fulfilled by it all the time, just that you mostly are. Like writing, the good days of creating are amazing, and the bad days are, that saying about writing, you stare at a blank sheet of paper until drops of blood appear on your forehead. That's what it feels like. It's hard. And there's elements of all of the stuff that I do, I'm like, this is not my most favorite thing to do. But for me, I'm like, okay, so I'm trying to write beautifully, and I'm trying to write useful stuff for the world, stuff that hasn't been, I'm often trying to unweird topics for people. I'm trying to unweird coaching and the coaching habit. I'm trying to unweird how to build better working relationships and how to work with almost anyone. The next book I'm working on is a book around how change happens in organizations. I'm trying to unweird that for people. And the idea of how I create that and how I structure it and how I build a business on the back end of it, all of that I love. And then there's okay, so now I need to do the work. I need to do the interviewing. I need to do the writing. I need to do the negotiation around what it means to build a book with my publishers. All of that ebbs and flows in terms of how much happiness I've got around it. But I'm connected to that bigger purpose that I'm trying to work on.
That makes a total sense in terms of thinking through the ebb and the flow, and putting the ebb and the flow in the bigger context so it doesn't sort of drain you on it. Yeah,
because it's worth understanding the difference between draining and difficult. A previous book of mine called How to Begin, there's a phrase in that that's kind of the heart of it, I think, which is we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things. And, in that book, when I talk about setting a worthy goal, a goal that is thrilling and important and daunting, you got thrilling, which means it speaks to something that matters to you. You got important, which means it's a positive contribution to the world. It gives more to the world than it takes. And daunting means it's on the edge of your competence and your confidence and your sense of self and your sense of capacity. And so there's times when you're doing a worthy goal where you're like, I'm lost, I'm stuck, I'm miserable, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, that is you unlocking your greatness. That is future you beckoning present you to say, stick with this, because this is how you become the next best version of who you can be.
So you've been out talking about the book since you published it. What would you say is the most challenging thing from the book for people? Like, what do people look at you, read it, and look at you and go, "Oof, you're really asking me to do that?"
Didn't really want to do that.
Yeah. I think there is a general reluctance to have a keystone conversation. I think people go, it's difficult. I was talking to a guy who used to run the university for General Mills, so the big cereal producer in Minneapolis, and he was like, "This is a really great book, and what you're asking people to do is difficult." And I'm like, "That is true, or at least it's difficult in part because it's not that common. It's a bit unknown." Now, I would say that coaching is also difficult. For a lot of people, it's like, I don't know what coaching is. It's a bit weird. It's a bit touchy-feely HR. I don't want to do that. And I think in the coaching habit, I've tried to break down some of those barriers. So I feel like I'm trying to do the same with this book as well. Right at the start of the book, we talk about a commitment to trying to improve 10 million working relationships, which is a lot, but not that many if things take off and things go well and I stick with it. But I do think there's often at the end of an interview, people are like, "So what's the call to action? What's the thing you want people to hear?" I'm like, I think the call to action is to be the person who reaches out. There's that lovely quote, people don't like to be the first person to say hello, but everybody loves to be greeted. And what I'm trying to break down here, or challenge at least, is this idea of nobody wants to have this conversation. It's too weird. This would never work. Because I think that's often what happens. We're like, this is a good idea for other people, but I don't know. There's nobody I could do it with. I'm like, why don't you be the person who reaches out and takes the risks and be a bit vulnerable about how this conversation might go? Because things might shift and more people might be willing to do this than you might think. And I still think that for me, as the person who is now trying to get people to buy this book and buy into this idea, I've still got work to do to try and make this feel like a leap that people are willing to take.
I'm thinking.
I wondered what that would look like.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I've just got so many questions, and I'm trying to put them in some sort of order, but then I realize that probably doesn't matter with you because you're good at handling all of these things. Overarching stories at work, when you're at work, the culture that you're in, the permissiveness, I guess that the baseline psychological safety that's there for starting this conversation.
Yeah.
That's pretty variable.
Very.
And it's part of almost how you choose, it becomes a bit self-selecting. You can go to an organization where you almost match your level of risk with your level of psychological safety. How much do you see that play into what people have experienced as they've given you feedback about the book?
Well, here's how I try and tackle that. I say to people, it's so easy to kind of go, "Oh, we can't do that around here because of the culture." And I'm like, well, who's the we and who's the here, and what's the around here? And I think it is difficult to change a culture of an organization. But what I hope is that people go, well, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. You're like, okay, but you, for you as a leader, who do you want to have these conversations with? And who are you willing to take the risk for? There's that great quote, I think from Alvin Toffler, that the future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So there's a way that you can be the future of your organization by being the person who's willing to do that. There's another change model called positive deviance, where it's just a wonderful story. Its roots are in social innovation. An American company, I think it was in Vietnam, and they were like trying to help solve infant mortality in Vietnam or Cambodia. It's some Southeastern Asian country that I'm temporarily forgetting. And there was some kind of clash with America. And as part of the consequences of that, this nonprofit organization said, right, you've got 6 months to solve child malnutrition or we're kicking you out of the country. And so far they've been there for 50 years and not made a whole lot of progress. So 6 months, the pressure is on. And they're like, I don't know how this is going to work. But one of the people there did something very interesting. He went around each village and he weighed the babies. And in every village, there were a majority of children that were malnourished, and there were always a few outliers who were well-nourished. And these were the positive deviants, deviating from the norm in a positive, good way. And what they did is they interviewed the parents of these kids, and they found that they just had a whole bunch of behaviors that were different from the norm. Typically, in this case, they fed the babies smaller meals more often. They fed them food that other people didn't think was food, like certain greens or certain small crabs. The fathers were more likely to be involved in the feeding. And then they did something brilliant. They went, rather than us coming in as the outsiders and explaining to everybody this is what you should do, they got the people who were succeeding in their context to then teach what they were doing to the other people in their villages. They became, it's a way of working around homeostasis, the way systems resist change. Because you're like, actually, the change is already happening within the system. We're just trying to amplify that and speed that up. So, I want people to be the positive deviants in their teams and in their business units and in their organizations. I want them to be the future that hasn't yet been fully distributed across their company, because it is easy to find certain relationships or certain people or certain parts of a company where you're like, this will never work. And I'm like, sure. But show me the people it will work with. When it says how to work with almost anyone, tell me who your almosts are, and that leaves everybody else. So get on with it.
I love the way that you approach this as a conversation too. Like you said, you had considered titles around like an operating manual, and you hear stories about how people write operating manuals. So here's how to work with me, right?
Right.
And they write a big document and they hand it to you, and therefore, then it's your job.
It drives me nuts.
It's your job to figure out how to work with that person. But the way you approach this of having a conversation makes it a mutual exercise.
It does. That's a brilliant insight, Dave. Yeah, I'm glad you're saying that, because I want people to hear that, which is part of the magic of this is it creates a shared responsibility for the success of the working relationship. Yeah. And just as in the coaching habit and helping people be more coach-like, stay curious longer, one of the secret things that does is it actually disrupts hierarchy, disrupts power, because coaching moves responsibility for solving it from one person to another person, and in a way that kind of challenges kind of old ways of doing things. Here, having two people share responsibility for the health of their working relationship feels like quite a radical act and quite a humanizing act, I hope.
Yeah, the humanizing aspect of that, I think, is really, really important, especially when you think about extending it beyond just two people. And we spend a lot of time thinking about complexity and complex systems. and collective intelligence as opposed to collective stupidity. And because no one wants to be on the side of the stupid. They actually want to be on the side of the intelligent. And have you thought?
That's a good title for a book, by the way.
We're working on it.
Some version of that which is like, no one wants to be stupid, especially you. You should read this book.
Okay, I'm designing it right now.
It's such an interesting one because we realized that the more we talk about collective stupidity, the more it actually, that's what lights people up, is recognizing they don't want to be on that side of the debate.
Right.
If you say collective intelligence, everyone goes, oh, I don't even know what that means. But if you say collective stupidity, they say, I don't want that.
Yeah, and I'm surrounded by it.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, I'm the only person that's holding this place together at the moment. So, yeah.
Well, and everything we've done as a species is collective. And so much of our psychology, good and bad, reflects the fact that we rely on these deep human networks for our knowledge, for our action, for our agency, and also for our accountability and responsibility. So that sharing of the responsibility is actually the key motivator that gets people sort of bound and feeling a sense of accountability that they have to deliver. And I'm wondering if you've thought about how AI disrupts any of that, because it's so easy to just say, oh, well, the AI is going to take care of that. And, or take, automation bias, take your answer from the AI. And they're not where do they belong in this system of collective intelligence, or even if it's just between the machine and one person, when it's still the human who takes the responsibility?
Well, I don't know enough to answer that question in any way that isn't just, random jargon words generated by somebody flapping around. So I'd be curious to know how you answer that. I do believe that, for the foreseeable future, work mostly gets done through people. So even if you've got a brilliant way of using AI that generates all sorts of interesting things, the way stuff gets approved, the way stuff gets moved through, the way change happens, is still a very human experience. So it is a classic change mistake to think that the content and the rational case for change makes any difference. In Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch, they reshare the story of the metaphor of the elephant. And you've got the rider, you've got the elephant, you've got the path that they're going along. And they're like, this explains how change really works. You've got the rider, which is the rational case for change. You've got the elephant, which is the kind of emotional drivers of change. And you've got the path, which is the context and the environment in which change happens. And we all spend our time thinking about the rider of the elephant. But actually, the thing that makes the most difference is the path, because the elephant follows the path. The second biggest thing is the emotional case for change, and basically just barely hanging on is the rational case for change. And I suspect what AI does is it privileges the rational, and it privileges the content, and it privileges the stuff, and that's all good and dandy. But all that does is leave you with high quality stuff. Now you've got to make magic happen, and that happens through people.
Yeah, I was thinking about this sort of question of how do we put AI in your book together? Like sort of thinking about that combination. And the one thing that I'll put out there to see how you both react to it is that this sort of the exercise that we talked about, which I'm very focused on because I experienced it and it had a profound effect. This sort of question of what are you best at? What is your best? Sorry, and what are you fulfilled by? The interesting question is, how does specifically generative AI change anything in those boxes? So I can, like yesterday, I was in the process of producing and publishing a long series of blog posts that Helen wrote. And, there's a lot of production stuff which can fall into any one of those boxes. But what I do recognize is that generating the images using Midjourney is something that I'd say is in that best and fulfilled by category. I actually really enjoy it. I get a lot out of it. And I spend a lot of time thinking about exactly what I want to create. But then there's this little process of creating an SEO description that'll show up in Google's search thing that has to be 160 characters or less to fit in the box, and you have to summarize the whole thing. I was so happy to offload that to an AI and be like, here's my blog post, give me a summary targeted for SEO, 160 characters less. So it removed something from that not fulfilled category.
That's great.
And it's added something that's now in my capability to create images, whereas before I had to just go look through stock images and choose one, but I get more fulfillment out of creating it.
Yeah,
and
I hear that.
So it means to me that I sort of stop and I go, in some ways, this book is really, really, really important in this moment where everybody's jobs are changing, to stop and not just do what you're saying, which is have the keystone conversation to work with someone, but also have a reflection of how is this all changing with AI?
Yeah, totally. I mean, because it's certainly, this is it's one of those trivial but yet profound examples of, I too love to generate things on Midjourney.
Yeah.
But I'm given up competing with him for who gets to do that, because I think that he gets just a little bit more out of that than I do. And he's way better at it than I am, because he'll have another couple of cracks at it. But it's it is really fulfilling to be able to sit down and think through, how do I want to use these AI tools to move things around between these boxes and do things I've never done before, because these tools can really lift the bottom up. You know, they're a huge step up for learning to code, being more creative with art than you could ever be yourself. But at the same time, it also shifts time around so much. You end up with and what are you going to do with that extra time? Well, I would propose that you spend that time going and having that keystone conversation that you never had time for before.
Or just having a nap. Or just going home early. Or just hanging out with your kids or your spouse or whatever. I mean, there's a way that part of what this does is, when I talk about the coaching habit, I go, look, here's the big benefit for you being more coach-like. You get to work less hard and have more impact. And I think we're talking about a similar thing here, which is there's a way that you can use the tools around you. There's a way you can do this negotiation as this keystone conversation, where you're like, how do we most effectively work together so that we are wasting as little time as possible and we're playing to our strengths as much as possible? Because that may mean, A, better work gets done, but B, we just don't have to work as hard to get to the result that we're hungry for. Because, if you take that box that Dave has loved, what are you good at and what are you fulfilled by, I would guess that you can use generative AI to accelerate you for the fulfilling stuff, to accelerate you to get good at it faster.
Yeah.
And for the stuff that you are good at but not fulfilled by, it's like I can delegate a whole bunch of stuff here. I can automate a whole bunch of stuff here. But, in some ways this was true before AI. You're like, in either of those boxes, you're like, how do I speed this up? How do I get rid of this as much as possible? You've just got new tools now, and a tool that is so fast and so powerful and so iterative that these things can only happen faster potentially.
Yeah, well, I think about it as scale and the speed, because the analogy I think of is before COVID, there are times that people worked remotely. There were people who were hybrid workers. There were people who were fully remote. There were people who had the privilege of being able to leave at 2:30 every now and again to pick up kids from school or whatever. But that was not ubiquitous.
Right.
Now, since COVID, that is now that's fully entrenched, and there's battles over that. Back to the office now. No, I don't want to commute. I've let go of that idea of commuting, and now I viscerally feel in my body how completely unproductive that time was for me. And I think that's what's going to happen with a lot of these generative AI tools. It's like, don't tell me I can't use them, because I've now felt what it's like to only spend 5 minutes writing stuff that used to take me 2 hours and actually wasn't that important.
Exactly.
I'd start with if a machine's reading it, then a machine can write it.
Yeah. No, I think that's fantastic, and I totally agree. I'm like, on my kind of trivial but important thing, I'm like, as somebody who also tries to create content, and I've been doing that for 30 years, I'm like, I feel like I'm repeating myself. But I'm like, hey, IA, I need 20 headlines based around this topic. Now I need it with some flair. Now I need it with some Australian humor. Now not that much Australian humor. Now I need it with less Australian humor. And I'm like, oh, I thought of 8 of these already, but the 3 and 2 of them are thoroughly inappropriate, but 2 of them are really helpful here, and they've kicked me off into sparked me in a new way, in a way that would have taken me, I may never have got there otherwise.
Yeah.
Have you seen anyone use something like ChatGPT for the Keystone conversation?
I haven't, not yet. No, but it's an interesting thought. Because each of the 5 questions has 3 exercises associated with it around kind of ways of reflecting and doing your own work and kind of get to know yourself a bit better and find more nuanced and gritty and helpful answers around that. But it would be interesting to ask whatever your AI thing of choices to go, how would you answer this if you were me? And see if that gets people some way down the line of finding words and finding ideas that might work for them.
It might also be interesting to think about using a chat system to think about ways to invite someone to the Keystone conversation.
Yeah.
So here's the persona of the person that I'm trying to invite into this kind of conversation.
That's
you can
good,
set a
yeah.
lot of context. Can you give me 5 different ideas about ways that I might start that conversation and ask them to have this with me? Because I think you're probably right. That is a hard one, to say, can we sit down and have this?
Right.
And it might help people with a bit of confidence to say, okay, I see 5 of them. 2 of those are good. This is the one I'm going to go with, and I'm going to do a slightly, but suddenly feel a little bit more confident because they don't feel stalled at the start.
Yeah, well, and also you end up having that slight. It's an illusion, but it's not an illusion. That sense of, well, someone else has actually done this before. Yeah. Well, sometimes we've had groups that you have to put together for synthesizing an idea synthesizing a view around a decision, and it's controversial and it's difficult. Because a difficult decision, by definition, you can argue lots of different ways. Mm-hmm. And in that synthesis process, we've found that groups can do quite well, starting with a chat system that just outlines it and present this analysis back to me in the absolute most vanilla plain language form, no emotion, please. And it really sort of allows that initial depersonalization. It's almost like a little hack on the mind. It's like, well, you put that rational rider, you just look at the rider first, and you spend more, you just be more curious about the rider for just a little longer. Yeah. Then do the path, then do the elephant.
Nice. That's interesting.
So earlier in the conversation, you said this book started out because you were trying to write about change in organizations. And then you did say that your next book or 2 ahead is about change in organizations. So what is it that's getting you to come back to that topic?
He opened that notebook.
I know he opened the notebook. He's like, I've seen this same 3. It's been on that list of 3 things. Same ideas. I better finally do it. Yeah.
I just, it's one area in the world where I think there's a lot of noise and not a lot of signal. And I think people often, they either know about organizational change or they know about personal change, but there's not often a combination between them that brings them together. And I think I've got a way of teaching this, that the goal is not to write a 500-page book on this, it's to write a 100-page book that is a primer to understanding the core levers of how change works, and then an opportunity to go further if you'd like to go further in that in an ecosystem that's at the back of the book. I think people don't know what they don't know about change, and I think there's a way I can teach them about the whole way a system needs to be influenced to shift. so they can see what they already know and what they're already doing well and what they don't know and what they're not doing well. And it can, in some ways, almost be an audit for, okay, so what do we need to learn? What do we need to invest in? How do I need to get buy-in from senior people around that? So at least that's how I think it is at the moment. What the experience of writing a book is, as soon as you start writing it, all these ideas fall to pieces and it turns out you have nothing there at all. So I'm sure as soon as I start writing this, I'll go, what a stupid idea. So, don't hold me to this book. But I think that's the one that I think is calling me at the moment.
Well, I hope you do follow through on it. Your books have had a profound impact on us, as you know, helping in ways that are sometimes expected and sometimes unexpected. But your ability to put the complexity of human relationships in frameworks that are approachable and have, I guess, a sense of Australian humor.
But not too much.
But not too much. Means that they're really approachable. And so I'm excited for whatever comes next.
Thank you.
And I think we will. I'm now having my mind wandering about how we're going to apply this book and these frameworks in our work, helping people figure out what to do with generative AI and how it changes people's working relationships. And
Beautiful.
there's a little companion that we could write to go along with it about. Here's how you think about generative AI in these contexts. So
we should talk about that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Alan. It's been lovely to talk to you, as it always is.
Same.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe on Substack or your favorite podcast platform. And please leave a positive rating or comment. Sharing your positive feedback helps us reach more people and connect them with the world's great minds. Seriously, a review on Apple Podcasts is a big deal. And if you like how we think, then contact us about our speaking and workshops and human-centered product design. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com, and you can contact us at hello@getsonder.com. You can learn more about making better decisions in our book, Make Better Decisions, How to Improve Your Decision-Making in the Digital Age. The book is an essential guide to practicing the cognitive skills needed for making better decisions in the age of data, algorithms, and AI. Please check it out at mbd.zone, on Amazon, bookshop.org, or place an order through your favorite local bookstore.
Stay